The Intellectual Gentlemen's Club.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the IGC Podcast. I'm your host once again, Jason Abbott. Tonight, I'm really excited. I think by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be our anniversary episode for our 1 year. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Hopefully, we're going to have a 2-hour special here. I have a couple great guests tonight. But first, let me get to some business here. I just wanted to say thanks again for everybody for subscribing to the podcast, sharing it out on Twitter and Facebook, checking us out on YouTube, wherever you may find us. Any of the support really helps out. So appreciate that greatly out there. If you want to support the podcast, I always recommend that you help out our previous guests. But if there's anything additional, and you can use our affiliate links, you can go to www.intellectualgentlemensclub.com/support, or there'll be a support page right from our homepage. On there, you'll find our affiliate sponsors from Amazon.com, Audible.com, and Onnit.com. We also have a PayPal link on there as well, so you can check all those out. And anything you purchase through those portals with those companies, we get a little bit of a cut for it and helps pay our web hosting and things like that. I'm not making a ton of money off this, people. So, so without further ado, let me get to one of our previous guests from episode 9, Brad Burge. How you doing?
Hey, doing great, Jason. Thanks
I'm glad to have you back. Brad works for Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies as the Director of Communications. He's earned his BA in Communication and Psychology from Stanford. He's interned for the Drug Policy Alliance and has a long-standing interest in drug policy reform and activism. Welcome back to the show, Brad. Really glad to have you again.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And our other guest tonight is the one and the only Dennis McKenna. How are you, Dennis?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for being here. Dennis is an explorer of lands and of the mind. He is a world-renowned ethno-botanist. He has helped change the landscape of altered and expanded states of consciousness, for sure. Got his master's degree in botany at the University of Hawaii and received his doctorate in botanical sciences from the University of British Columbia. He is a co-founder and the director of ethnopharmacology at the Heffter Research Facility, and he's a professor at the University of Minnesota. He's also an author of way too many publications to mention. His latest book is about the experiences with his brother, Terrence McKenna, who passed away back in 2000. Most of you might be familiar with him. And the new book is called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. And a review for that's on our website on the IGC. Welcome, Dennis. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. One slight correction, though.
Go for it.
It's the Heffter Research Institute.
Yeah, sorry, I keep getting that mixed up. I'm sorry about that.
Heffner is somebody else.
Heffter, people.
Heffter,
Heffter.com, people.
T-E-R, right. Okay, a lot of people make that mistake, but we don't want to misdirect folks,
Absolutely, so. I can understand that. Sorry, people.
No problem.
All right, so let's hope that's my only mistake for the night. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, some people might be familiar with MAPS. Brad's been on the show before. Heffter is a different project that, Dennis, you coined up. What is the difference between MAPS that was established back in the 86 and Heffter back in 93? Do you guys work together on projects? I know you're doing similar research, but what are the primary differences between those two organizations?
Well, Brad, go ahead.
Sure. I'll definitely give it my best shot.
And then I'll weigh in. And
Great. Thanks.
Contradict everything you say.
This is a difficult exam. I'm kind of giving a report on the organization kind of to the person who started it. So, yeah, cool. No pressure, though. So MAPS is, as you mentioned, was founded in 1986 as a direct response to the emergency scheduling of MDMA. MDMA had previously been used in psychotherapy before it was scheduled, before it became illegal. And Rick Doblin, my boss, who's the current executive director, founded it in order to restore that research back to legitimacy. So to open up more conversations and to reopen research into that. Of course, MAPS was founded with a much broader mission than that. Not just to restore MDMA research, but also to bring back into conversations, honest conversations about psychedelics and about marijuana, and to push against this widespread paranoia and research blockades and just sort of general cultural avoidance of psychedelics that happened after the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. So MAPS has a very broad mission that includes not just clinical uses and scientific research into these substances, but we also hope to open up spaces where it's possible for people to use psychedelics in safe and beneficial ways outside of clinical contexts as well. So we're also looking at spiritual uses, which Heffter also looks into. We're also hoping to move into creativity. And we also sponsor harm reduction work. So we also work within communities of people who use psychedelics at festivals and at events to provide some on-the-ground support.
That's called the Zendo Project, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Thanks. That's the Zendo Project. That's our psychedelic harm reduction work. So we also have these broader educational initiatives. And I'd love for Dennis to comment a little bit on Heffter and sort of what track Heffter has chosen to follow in all of this legitimization.
Sure. Well, yeah, MAPS predates Heffter by a few years, and as Brad said, it was formed basically in response to the scheduling of MDMA, and it's a bigger organization. I mean, it's more grassroots, I would say. It's got a membership. A lot of its support comes from small donors, people that are passionate about this subject, and I'd say they're more politically active. They're they don't shy away from controversy, and Hefter's a little bit controversy shy, although you can't really be if you're involved in this field. But
That's all relative.
Yeah, it's all relative. But I mean, for example, we don't really advocate for legalization or anything like that. I mean, we believe in it. We think that's a good idea, but we're science wonks, basically. It was founded by a core group back in 1993, and it was basically David Nichols' idea that, why can't there be better scientific research on psychedelics? And no funding is coming from the government. So we thought, well, we'll start this nonprofit and try to garner support for scientific research from private sources. And that's kind of what we've done. We've been very successful at that, as has MAPS. And I view them as sort of, they're sister organizations. I mean, we certainly share a lot of the goals that MAPS shares, but our approach is a little less sort of out there in the political arena and more focusing on scientific research. Most of the leading researchers in the field of psychedelics are either are already on our board member, are already board members at Heffter, or are being supported by us, and also sometimes MAPS. I mean, we do collaborate in support. So we have similar goals, for sure. And I very much respect what MAPS is doing, and I think they respect what we're doing. But we tend to be the science. We tend to emphasize the science, and our approach to all this is, if we do rigorous science, especially clinical studies, and show that these substances are useful for things, then they'll have to change the schedule. They'll have to allow these things to be used in medical situations, and so far that seems to be true. So that's happening. It's happening slowly, but it is gradually. Perceptions are changing. So I think Heffter and MAPS both deserve a lot of credit for bringing that about.
Yeah, absolutely. Our recent conference, our conference last year, which MAPS and Heffter, as well as the Council on Spiritual Practices and the Beckley Foundation, we all four organizations collaborated on bringing together researchers for that conference, which was just a huge success. And I remember that just how many of the researchers had been Heffter sponsored, and how much of the really strong research that we have started to see now, looking at psilocybin and how it works in the brain, and how some of these changes that we see with psychedelics actually happen, how a lot of that came from a lot of Heffter's work. MAPS has, up until now been focused on opening up our clinical research program. So we've been focusing very specifically, or at least putting most of our effort behind our MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder research. And that's been a strategy to open the door for other research as well. And then also as part of that strategy, what we wanted to do, not only with the conference, but also with our broader public education, is to make sure that the results of the research are adequately understood and absorbed by the broader public. So a lot of our media outreach and a lot of our publications and a lot of the sort of public relations and marketing that we do around psychedelics are intended to magnify the results of this research that all of these organizations are now doing.
Awesome. Right. And I would like to also compliment MAPS for taking the initiative with that conference. I think that was a landmark conference in a way. It really put psychedelics back on the map in terms of a legitimate subject for scientific investigation. Very serious researchers, very good science is now being done. And the conference was a forum to gather all that together, not only people that were involved in it, but people that were just interested in it. It attracted what, Brad? About 2,500 people ended up attending that conference. And
it was about 1,200, which was
1,200.
Yeah, which was still
less than I thought, but that's still a lot.
It certainly felt like a lot. Yeah. And I'll just add that. Dennis, you spoke at that conference, and we have all of those videos now up online at psychedelicscience.org. They've been very, very popular. We have over 100 videos on there. So your listeners, Jason, should definitely check it out.
Yeah, for sure. Check it out at maps.org, people.
Maps.org, and or just Google Psychedelic Science 2013, and it will come up.
Yeah,
YouTube, right?
I would like to say that. Not only doing the conference, but then putting those videos up there is basically creating a wonderful educational tool for
Absolutely.
people. And when people approach me about, careers in this research, or they just want to know about it, they want to know about the science side of it, I just say, here, go to this link. It's all here. Look at these people and look at what they're doing. If you want to get your head around kind of the state of the art of psychedelic research right now. There is a lot of it, and there's a lot of good work being done in various major areas. So it's very useful just to have that on the web. Don't take it down anytime soon.
We're not planning on.
No.
So with MAPS and Heffter, it seems that your research is a little bit, I wouldn't say divided, but you focus on different areas. With MAPS, it seems like MDMA, assisted psychotherapy, is really what you guys are trying to put all your time and effort in at this point. And Dennis, at Heffter, it seems like psilocybin is really the go-to material at that point, just research and what you're doing there. So, Brad, last time we talked about the PTSD and the assisted psychotherapy with MDMA. Actually, we had on a veteran for the U.S. Army Rangers, Tim Amoroso. You guys check that out. It's in our archive there. He was very candid about, the experiences that he had overseas, what it was like coming back. And then near the end of the conversation, we got into how he basically couldn't get involved in any of the MAPS research programs, and that he kind of took things into his own hands, experimented with MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, and really it changed his life. And you could tell just by his outlook and his attitude. And he's, now a normal functioning member of society back again. So what kind of results are you guys getting, and what does it take to get into that type of research project if you are having PTSD symptoms?
Well, first of all, Jason, the main result that I realized from that is that people are willing to talk about their experiences openly and honestly. I mean, that's
a powerful thing.
Huge. Yeah. Just knowing that Tim wanted to come on the show and to talk to you in such detail, in such intimate detail about this experience that formerly somebody in his position would not have wanted to talk about. That in itself, I think, is a marker of a huge success. And so thank you for providing the forum for that.
It was a pleasure.
Very much. And in terms of our research results, we currently have 2 completed phase 2 studies and 4 ongoing phase 2 studies. The way that clinical pharmaceutical drug development works is it's separated into phases. And these are phases of FDA studies. So there are studies that have been approved by the FDA, and you have to proceed through these phases in order to create bigger studies, in order to get enough results to show the FDA that a treatment is both safe and effective for a certain condition. So we're currently in phase 2. We then have to move to phase 3. So right now we have 4 ongoing studies that are trying to build on our previous results. Our completed studies now have shown, our last completed one showed that 83% of the subjects who participated in our MDMA-assisted psychotherapy study no longer had PTSD after just 2 sessions.
That's incredible.
So this is a series of psychotherapy sessions, 7 or 8 normal psychotherapy sessions, and then just 2 psychotherapy sessions where they also get MDMA. And the MDMA is there to supplement the talk therapy. So after just 2 sessions, we're finding these huge results where 83% of the people compared to 25% of the placebo actually recovered from PTSD after this. And we also found that those results lasted almost 4 years following the treatment. So now we have these 4 ongoing studies that are trying to replicate these results. And so far, the preliminary results are looking very good. We have people coming out of the studies now talking about these changes that Tim is now, that Tim spoke about on your show last time. So we're able to talk about those studies and talk about MDMA in this really legitimate clinical context. And I think it's helping people be a little bit safer talking about their experience.
It's incredible. I dabbled with MDMA, and but I really, what this podcast really has done for me is when I'm having guests like you guys on, or whoever I might have on, it forces me to do a little background research and read up on it. And, it's been an informational journey for me. But I know with my own personal experience with that, that experience has never left me. Those really life-changing experiences, it's something that you really can't put a price on. And especially for somebody in suffering, if you're a veteran or somebody who has been previously raped or something traumatic has happened to them, I mean, that's a priceless thing for them to be able to experience, I think. And it is something that typically you hear over and over again about people, hanging on to that type of experience, whether it might be MDMA or psilocybin or LSD. These are some of the most important experiences of people's lives. I mean, I would say on my hand, I could count 5 different experiences in my life that really shaped who I am. And some of these substances and the experiences I had on them are definitely up on that list as far as
meaningful.
Yeah, it's the most meaningful experience that I've had.
Steve Jobs said the same thing.
Yeah, and so exactly. I mean, I'm happy that you brought that up, because that's exactly what these things do, and they are if we'd never heard of psychedelics,
what a buzzword!
If they didn't have this tradition of shamanic use and indigenous use and so on, if they came out of Pfizer's laboratories or something, and they said, hey, we have a pill here that will let you have the most significant experience of your life, wouldn't we want to bring that to the market? I mean, I think
it'd be a big hit, Pfizer.
I think
Pfizer
it would be a big
hit.
I mean, it would be approached completely different, but
Sure.
Because of its tradition, because of its, its stigmatized reputation and so on, psychedelics are, not only not available to people, even though they can elicit these types of experiences under the right circumstances, but they are in fact prohibited Schedule I substances, and
no medicinal use.
No recognized value or
Right.
medicinal use at all. This is what MAPS and Heffter are fighting, And,
we'd expect the pharmaceutical companies, like you're saying, Dennis, to just pick up on something that could offer you this meaningful, powerful, transformative experience. But that's something that's hard to sell to people more than a couple of times.
Well, exactly. They want psychopharmaceuticals that you take 4 times a day for the rest of your life.
It's a much better one.
A much better business model. Yeah. As as a business model, as a profit center, psychedelics are, they just don't reach the bar. And this is one reason why, pharmaceutical companies are not interested in developing these things. And of course, the classic ones, MDMA, psilocybin, DMT, LSD, all those, they've been off patent for years.
Right.
Not that others couldn't be invented, and in fact they have, but they've been off patent. So pharmaceutical company has no motivation to develop these. And I don't think it's, these are not things that you can just take. You need a context. These are always going to be used as adjuncts in a therapeutic situation. So, that's the business model. There's a place you can go and have these experiences.
I wonder, Dennis, just given, what you've seen, you've been in this field a long time, is it possible that the pharmaceutical establishment, that we could get to a point where we have a pharmaceutical model or pharmaceutical manufacturing or some way of approaching drugs in our society that could actually incorporate these kinds of experiences?
I mean, they are being manufactured currently, so...
Yeah, you can certainly have pharmaceutical manufacturing, and these drugs that are used in clinical context, in these clinical studies and so on, they're made to the highest standards of quality.
Sure.
Right. But as far as the drug companies, pharmaceutical companies producing lots of these, I don't think that's the model. I think the model is more, these substances are available and you need there to be used as adjuncts for psychotherapy. Nobody is going to say, take two MDMAs and call me in the morning, take 2 of these psilocybin, you won't be able to do that, and you shouldn't. That's not the way, and I think in that respect, I think actually we have to, we have to look back at the traditional use of these things, shamanism and so on. Shamanism and the use of ayahuasca in indigenous societies, for example, is basically the model to look at. And I think that if these psychedelics ever do get integrated into medical practice, psychotherapy and shamanism are going to migrate together. Psychotherapeutic use of psychedelics looks a lot like shamanism and vice versa.
It's the original therapy, right?
Yeah, and so we're going to rediscover that and repurpose it to the modern era. But there's a lot we can learn from traditional shamanism. They haven't been doing it. They've only been doing it for 100,000 years. So, they might have learned a thing or two that we could benefit from knowing.
I just always thought they were savages, Dennis.
Well, I hate to disabuse you. We're the savages.
True indeed. True.
Yeah, the first culture in history to forget our history.
That's right.
Yeah. In my experience with modern psychiatry, which is why I'm involved in the field of psychedelic science because of my frustrations with it, is that you go in and you have a 5-minute conversation and they give you your drug and you go home and it's a conversation about your dosage and, your side effects. And that's a lot of what happens. A lot of psychiatrists I talk to, they say, I've got 12 minutes.
Right.
I'm not supposed to be talking to you about your family history or what. I just need to give you a drug and get you out the door. What Dennis is talking about, bringing in from shamanism and bringing in from these other traditional practices is, I think, something that's a more inclusive approach to these drugs, where it's not just taking a drug. It's taking the drug and focusing on the experience, on the transformative experience or the spiritual experience or the insightful experience that you can have. And that involves both the drug and a setting.
Exactly.
We talk about setting a lot on the show. And that's a primary example. You can't really go into these things. You were saying you can't. It's basically not a party drug. Any of these things, and you can use them however you want. You're going to get the effects no matter what. But really, to get to the most beneficial use out of this, I believe, it's in almost a clinical setting, somewhere where it's safe, it's comfortable. You're making the people feel open and willing to talk and get that shit out. It's something that's been boiled up inside of people for a long time. So Dennis, how does the research with psilocybin differ from what MAPS is doing with MDMA? What types of things are you researching with it?
Well, MAPS was started because of MDMA, and MAPS has focused a lot. I mean, they focused on other things, but that's been kind of the holy grail of their quest, is to get MDMA, which is basically a very, usable, benign drug, properly used. Of course, it can be misused, but to get it approved for use in clinical situations, and I guess primarily for PTSD, which is a big problem. Possibly for other things. I mean, we don't know. We haven't really explored, what the limits of the therapeutic potential of MDMA is because of the restrictions. I mean, getting any one of these clinical trials approved is a huge challenge, right? So there's like a spectrum of things that, that might be useful for. I've heard social anxiety disorder, possibly addictions, possibly, even autism and things like that. MDMA might have some potential there. Psilocybin is, I guess we came to it initially because of the cancer studies, the idea that psilocybin can be used in a context of a terminal illness to help a person come to terms with the existential anxiety associated with their dying. And one of the reasons that psilocybin was kind of the drug of choice there is because it's non-toxic and it's compatible with human metabolism. And you can be quite ill and take psilocybin and your body can handle it. So it's ideal for these what amount to hospice situations.
I imagine ayahuasca would be much different in a terminal situation with the
ayahuasca, it would depend on the person's condition, but ayahuasca can be a little rough on your body sometimes, what with the throwing up and all that. So it's not necessarily what you want to give to a frail, cancer patient. Although
I want to make things a little easy for them. Yeah,
make it easy, and then psilocybin is good in those sorts of situations. It's also promising for these other syndromes like addiction. Right now, there's a smoking cessation study, a small study underway at Johns Hopkins under Roland Griffiths. One of his residents there is doing a small study for smoking cessation. These are lifetime smokers, 3 packs a day. Absolutely nothing else has worked to help these people quit cigarettes. 87% response rate. So that is a jaw dropper by any measure. There's nothing else that even comes close when it comes to quitting smoking. The other thing that psilocybin is very promising for is essentially as a tool for neuroscience and a tool to understand spiritual experiences and the connections between brain functions and spirituality and
mysticism and those type of experiences.
Mysticism, exactly. Roland Griffith's studies on essentially inducible mystical experience, have been groundbreaking, and we now have a tool, to understand what is going on in the brain when a person is having a transcendent experience or one of these lifetime meaningful experiences, and how does that compare to, say, a spontaneous mystical experience, whatever that is, or a Tibetan monk that's meditated for years to achieve this kind of experience. What's going on in their brains, and how is that similar to what's going on in psilocybin? Someone on psilocybin. And we now have the tools like neuroimaging tools, fMRI and this sort of thing. So at least we can say, well, we can put these brain maps side by side and say, well, this area is lit up here in the Tibetan monk, and it seems the same areas are activated, in a person on psilocybin. So we're beginning to essentially use psilocybin to dissect out the fundamental mechanics of consciousness, I guess you could say. And so I think that's very promising as a tool. My brother famously said, and I don't think I can disagree with him, psychedelics are to neuroscience and consciousness study what the telescope is to astronomy.
Wow, yeah.
If we would only use them, we could learn a great deal about what consciousness is. And that's the mandate for neuroscience in the 21st century. And if you don't use these substances to sort that out, then you're not going to have a complete model. So, yeah, psilocybin is very ideal for certain things.
Yeah. I remember a study of, I think it was a Heffter-sponsored study, where it was looking at, or it may have been Beckley, Dennis, you can correct me, looking at the effect of psilocybin on, I believe it was resting state hippocampal activity. It was looking at how psilocybin actually reduced activity in certain areas. I found that a very interesting study.
I think that was David Nutt's study.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. It was an interesting finding where it was looking at how psilocybin actually reduced activity in certain areas of the brain associated with memory and cognitive function, where I think normally we talk about psychedelics as producing extra things or producing hallucinations or adding things onto our experience, where that kind of contradicted that, and maybe it plays into its role in smoking cessation.
Yeah, it's very possible. I think, that study was very interesting because the finding was unexpected. Mm-hmm. And it suggested a different sort of mechanism in terms of what's going on. It's not necessarily that it activates or hyperactivates connectivity between these different brain areas. It seems to decouple them. Mm-hmm. And so the idea, the brain is like a lot of biological systems. It's made up of inhibitory feedback loops, and if you interrupt those inhibitions, then certain parts of the brain are free to just without any inhibition, become active. And the areas of the brain that contain these psychedelic receptors, the so-called serotonin 2A receptors, become decoupled from other parts of the brain that would normally put the brakes on that. So then you're just free floating in a psychedelic experience, and the rest of the brain is temporarily inhibited from interfering with that. So that is, we're learning again fundamental things about the way the brain works using these tools that we never suspected before. So that alone demonstrates their value. Apart from the whole therapeutic aspect, which of course is tremendous.
We posted something on our Facebook page today about new study with psilocybin can repair damage from extreme trauma in low doses. Do you guys know anything about studies like that?
Well, not offhand, but yes.
It says it confirmed previous research done by the Imperial College of London that psilocybin, a naturally occurring compound present in mushrooms, stimulates new brain cell growth and uses frightening memories.
Yes, I know this study. And again, I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm. I think MDMA probably has a similar kind of brain reorganizing effect. And Brad can address this maybe better than I, but MDMA has been under a cloud in some ways since the 80s, since the early 90s, and under a cloud because of the whole issue of neurotoxicity, right?
Oh, right.
MDMA is neurotoxic, whatever that means, under, in high doses, repeated doses. It certainly does rearrange, or it does affect your serotonin system. It's not clear how much you can extrapolate from the animal studies to the human studies, but there's probably something going on there. And yeah, it's probably not a good idea if you think you have to take 400 milligrams of MDMA 4 times a week. You're kind of missing the point anyway, and you should find something else.
Yeah, I think what's happening with MDMA is it's helping reorganize neural connections.
Right, makes a lot of sense.
That's what I was getting to. Eventually, I think it does help because the brain we're now understanding is a much more neuroplasticity is the buzzword. We used to think that we have a certain complement of neurons, and that was pretty much what you were born with, and everything after that was a loss. Now we know that actually that's not the case.
Oh yeah.
Well, we're creatures of habit too, so when we adjust our habits, I think it takes 7 days really for you to do something over and over again to develop a different pattern, and that's got to change your permanent, trajectory of your life at that point. So that makes a lot of sense.
That in mind, right? Is that our brains are actually goo. They're slimy goo, and it takes time.
Malleable, right?
It takes time for these goos to shift around in our head.
Right.
And there are some tools that enable us to do that more consciously. Or faster. There are also things that reduce it, that make it harder.
Yeah.
There are drugs that do that, like alcohol, for example. And I think when we're talking about the difference between the beneficial use of something like MDMA and the riskier use of it, is that again it's changing the brain, and it's a drug, it's a thing. It doesn't have any motivation of its own. It doesn't go in there and saying, I'm going to heal this person's trauma, although some people with a spiritual orientation might think it does. But rather it's how it's used, and it's the intention and the therapeutic process and what's happening while somebody is under the effects of these drugs that really influence what's happening.
Right.
And so MAPS now, definitely inspired by a lot of the brain research that Heffter has been doing. We've added a new sub-study onto one of our ongoing studies of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in veterans, where we're taking fMRI and heart rate readings as well. So we've added brain imaging and heart rate, so we can start to see maybe how some of these brain changes are related to the therapeutic effects that we're getting.
Very
right.
Cool.
And I also think, Brad mentioned the habituation. I think that's one of the main areas where main sort of or therapeutic modalities of both MDMA and psilocybin, and to a certain extent ibogaine, which is not talked about as much, but it also has great promise for treating addictions.
Sure.
And in PTSD, addictive states, alcohol dependence, all of these things, it's a matter of creating a window to disrupt these habitual behaviors. And so after this, that's a lot of what these psychedelics do. They open up a window post-session for about a week, maybe 10 days, where you have an opportunity to actually dehabituate to that behavior and adopt new modalities of behavior that don't involve abusing the substance, right? It gives you an opportunity to step back from that sort of behavioral prison, if you want to say, that you find yourself in, and discover a new way to relate to the substance that that you're addicted to, and the other therapeutic methods, modalities too. I think dehabituation or reconditioning to a more I don't know what you would say, a less self-destructive way of behaving is a big part of this. Would you agree with that, Brad?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that from personal experience, once again, is really all I have to lean on. I don't have a big research facility behind me or anything, but in my own personal experiences, it seems like all these things have changed me in a subtle way, to where, like MDMA, it opened up my empathy receptors. I'm much more empathetic to people, across the board now, regardless if they have my same views or if they don't. Things like dextromethorphan, it really kind of allowed me to see like the entirety of the universe and how big it really is, and really was able to blow my head, just kind of and take all that in. Psilocybin, it really destroyed my ego in the high dose that I did at the time, and it really showed me, look, these are the things you need to work on. Like, why are you doing these certain things? And you're right. After there was about a week after, and that's a big significant trip where I was able to adjust and change some patterns that I had been shown quite bluntly throughout the experience that I needed to change. And I feel like those kind of experiences have guided my life's path, and I'm pretty happy with who I am at this point. So, but I can't imagine what my life would be without certain experiences that I've undergone. So switching gears here, Dennis, let's talk about your book a little bit, Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. I
was wondering when you'd get to that.
We got to do some intros here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say, I
Sure.
guess you said Amazon.com is one of your affiliates,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So folks can order that off Amazon.com.
Hit our link, people.
That's
great.
That's the quickest, easiest way to get it. You can order it off my website, which is brotherhoodofthescreamingabyss.com. I'll get around to it, but if you go to Amazon, you'll get it real fast. So it's there.
So it chronicles, I read the book. I was fascinated by it. I've read other accounts of psychedelic explorers and experiences and things like that. I really enjoyed yours because it took a very honest look at, from when you were growing up with your brother, what it was like. You mentioned in there he was more of kind of a tormentor in your younger years, and how your relationship developed, and he was away for certain bouts of time, as were you, and you guys always came back together and had these ideas. And you grew up in a smaller town, Paonia, Colorado. Am I saying it right?
Yep, Paonia.
Paonia, and a beautiful place out there, by the way, Colorado. But it seems like you guys were almost misfits together with this little small town atmosphere. You mentioned some of your friends were into the same type of stuff, but you guys knew that there was something underlying. There was more to be shown, and you always had a very healthy curiosity, I would say, about the world around you. And so from a very young age, what do you think was the catalyst to kind of put you guys both on this quest? I mean,
I think multiple factors. And in my own case, of course, Terrence was 4 years older than I was.
Right.
So he was he was always out front, and he was an envelope pusher, and he liked to be provocative. I mean, he was like, an unruly little boy who likes to poke a stick in people's eyes. I mean, he made a career out of that. Essentially just being a provocative thinker. Sure. And being really out front about some of these controversial ideas. And and me being 4 years younger than he was, as I say in the book, whatever he was into, that was cool. That was what I wanted. Right? That was the thing to do. And I wasn't the only one. A lot of people wanted to be involved in whatever he was doing because he was doing neat stuff. And I think we both owed it really. In some ways, we owed our father a debt for this. Although our dad would be the first to deny it, because my dad was he was really invested when he came back from the war. He was really invested in the idea of being just an ordinary guy, just being an average Joe, and his name was Joe. So, that, but he just wanted to settle down and have a normal life. He experienced all that trauma in World War II, and he just wanted to come settle in this small town, the same town my mom grew up in, and that's what he did. And he was very much invested in being just one of the guys, right? But the thing is, he wasn't one of the guys, and this was a part of himself that he denied. He was actually smarter than most of the guys, and he was bookish. He'd been a bookish child because he'd had long illnesses he had rheumatic fever when he was a child, so it kept him at home a lot, and he read books, and he discovered science fiction, and he shared that with Terrence and I. And he spent, in his career, he was on the road most of the time. He was a traveling salesman. He had a regular route, regular customers, but he was driving from Monday to Friday, so he wasn't there. But he would come home with, these pulp science fiction magazines, or he would come home with Fate magazine. And my God, Terrence and I were all over that stuff. I mean, we would fight over the magazine, who got to read it first.
I wonder who won.
Terrence pretty much won most of the time, but I get to it. And the thing is, we would read all this crazy stuff about paranormal experiences, flying saucers, aliens, the abominable snowman, all that stuff. So that helped create the mindset in us, and this interest in just weird stuff, just peculiar, unexplained phenomena. And so then, we're primed for that. I mean, I was 10 years old in 1960, and LSD was beginning to, sort of get some attention in the media and all that. And we thought, well, this stuff that we're interested in, other dimensions and, other aliens and all this stuff. Here's a drug that apparently lets you experience that. So that's what got us into it. I mean, and he was, my dad was, completely freaked out that we were interested in drugs of any kind. I mean, he was not a druggie in any way or open to it in any way. But yet at the same time, he had this sort of secret life, this sort of secret interest in things that, his golfing buddies would not
cross their eyes at.
Really, they would not. It wouldn't have crossed. They wouldn't have understood, and he never talked about it with them. But he read this stuff.
It's interesting. In your book, I just want to butt in here for a minute. Excuse me. But in the book, you mentioned your interest in drugs originated from funny feelings accessed through carnival and other do-it-yourself methods of altering consciousness, like dizziness. I'm thinking about spinning around in a circle when you're a kid. So were there a lot of those type of things where, that kind of got the ball rolling? That was like the gateway. Instead of marijuana being a gateway drug, it was like spinning around.
Yeah, it was the gateway. I mean, I kind of lived for the carnival, which came by once a year. And I like those proprioceptive alterations, and also, my dad, he had a light plane later on in the late 50s and 60s. He had a light plane which he used to travel his territory, but we could take it out on weekends, and if you fly a parabola, you can simulate weightlessness,
right,
and things like that. And we used to just go up together and just do this for hours.
Do barrel rolls.
So, he was like, he would never take a drug, but he was a sensation freak.
Sure.
He loved those feelings, and I did too. And that's something that we shared. And later on, when I was a teenager and I was taking drugs, I would say, well, Dad, you like to go up and fly, and that for you is a mystical experience. And it really was. It was, it was a spiritual thing for him to fly. That's when he really felt at peace. And I said, well, drugs can take you to the same place, and no, he didn't want to hear about that.
It was preposterous to him. I guess,
it was preposterous. They're all garbage. It's all terrible.
That was the cultural backbone back then,
That was
right?
the cultural background. But just to tell you, he drank plenty, and he and his friends all drank. Right? It was accepted. But the thing is, I remember a conversation that we had. This is where the level of understanding was at the time. It was all about, well, those drugs that you want to take, they mess up your brain. They're bad for you. They screw up your nervous system, and alcohol just makes your muscles kind of relax. And, no idea that, well, of course it's a psychoactive drug, but
there was no MAPS back then. There's no Heffter.
There was no
then,
MAPS.
so.
There was nothing.
Where was the primary source of information? Just like nightly news coming off the box at ABC, NBC, or where were people getting their information back then?
Well, depends on the era. I mean, the first time it broke surface really was the Life magazine article on magic mushrooms in 1957. That was the first time we ever heard of any of this.
Holy shit,
and
right?
I remember my brother, I'm in 1957, so I was I would have been I'm 4 years younger, so I was young, I couldn't even read at the time. But my brother, I remember him following my mother around the house, waving this magazine, saying, Mom, what is this about? What is this about? Well, of course, she didn't know what it was about. Yeah. But so there was that one, that article, and I think that really, in some ways, when that emerged into mass consciousness, I mean, Life magazine, everybody subscribed to Life magazine. It was on everybody's coffee table throughout the country. And here's this article on magic mushrooms, and it's presented in a, not a pejorative way. There was no stigma. It was like a National Geographic adventure. This Wall Street banker with this strange hobby is going to Mexico and finding these fungi that give strange visions, and it's all discussed in a very positive way.
Sounds very science fiction too at that time.
Very science fiction as well. Yeah. And then in the 60s, when LSD was beginning to get known, there was another Life magazine. There was at least 2 Life magazine articles, but I remember one that came up about 1965 or 66, cover article on LSD. And, we were by that time pretty fascinated by all this. So that was the way that we first found out about it. And then later, as time went on, I mean, I think Carlos Castaneda's first book was a big influence. But by that time we were already into it. I mean, that was all the height of the, Timothy Leary was out there, and it was just happening,
Sure. It would be an interesting time. Would you say, I was actually talking with somebody on Facebook, and he posted an article about sugar, and it was something I was talking with another friend about the week prior, and everybody wants to talk about marijuana being a gateway drug. But when I look closely at what sugar does to my kids and different kids and people in general, I know for me, I loved sugar when I was a kid. I'm still a chocoholic. That was probably my first introduction to something giving my body reaction the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
Would you say that sugar did anything prior to getting involved in any drugs or anything like that when you were young?
Well, I would say that chocolate was a big influence, and of course that contains a lot of sugar. I mean, that's another thing. My dad, the McKennas are huge chocoholics. And
I'm in good company then, huh?
My dad, he traveled all week. He expected when he came home on Friday night, there would be a chocolate cake waiting for him, and there was, because my mom was a great mom, and she, they were very much in the, 50s modality. The housewife stays at home and her job is to, look after her husband, and she pampered him. And among the things that, he just expected was a chocolate cake. Well, of course, we participated in that as well. And that's really what got us going, and yeah, and I love chocolate to this day. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Fortunately, we can now justify it because it's so darn good for you, in the right form. It's great.
Would you say if people read the book, they'll definitely say, I guess you were in for a wild ride as your life progressed. And when you finally left home and you were off in college, is that like the time where you really started to blossom and start to really think about these different substances and what the benefits are? Or is it more of a party thing until you kind of went exploring off to the jungle?
No, well, I was into them well before I left high school. I was in the Haight-Ashbury in 1967 because Terrence was living in Berkeley at that time, and I went out there with a friend of mine that summer, and that was the first summer I took LSD. And then it was really DMT, which we also encountered that summer. That was really the trigger for, I guess, both Terrence and I to kind of realize, this is not just a party drug. This is profound. This is really important stuff. Not just the most important drug that we'd ever encountered, but the most important thing we'd ever encountered.
I want to ask you real quick, when you mention this DMT, there's two different types of DMT. There's the NN-DMT and then the 5-MeO-DMT. Was there still two different types back in the day, or is this something recent?
No, there was DMT, and not very much of that. It was very rare at the time, but we did. And 5-MeO-DMT is a derivative of DMT. It's not the same as DMT. Uh-huh. They're psilocybin and psilocin are also derivatives of DMT.
Which are all tryptamines, right?
They're all tryptamines, okay. Yeah. Psilocybin is chemically it's psilocin, which is the active form of psilocybin. Psilocybin is converted to psilocin in the body, and psilocin is 4-hydroxy-DMT. 5-methoxy-DMT, 4-hydroxy-DMT. Bufotenine is 5-hydroxy-DMT. I don't want to get bogged down in chemistry. I don't want to bore your listeners, but we could go on and on and on about this. But 5-methoxy-DMT is qualitatively quite different than DMT. DMT is kind of the prototype, archetypal psychedelic because it's so simple molecularly. It's in the brain. It's a neurotransmitter. We don't know what it's doing in there, but we have some ideas, and it's part of human metabolism. I mean, it's very, very close to tryptophan, and tryptophan's an amino acid that's in all living things. It's one of the 20 amino acids that make up proteins. So every living thing on Earth has tryptophan. And 2 steps away from that, enzymatically, 2 trivial modifications of tryptophan, and voila, you've got DMT. So that's another interesting thing about it. It's like, it's not exactly a scientific speculation, but if you think about it, is nature in some ways sending us a message and saying, hey, just look around the corner here, just pick up the thing and look underneath. And here you got innocent tryptophan, which is all over the place, but lurking just underneath it is, oh my God, there's DMT.
Right. I've been told it's quite a
that's a mystical idea, not a scientific one. But it is interesting that nature is drenched in DMT in some ways.
At the time where you took the DMT in this summer, the specific summer you're mentioning, you guys had no idea that this was the active ingredient in ayahuasca, right?
No,
it hadn't even been discovered really at that time.
It hadn't really been discovered. Yeah. About the time we took off for South America in search of this orally active drug called ukuhe, and we went looking for it because it was an orally active form of DMT. It wasn't even known for sure that ayahuasca the importance of the admixture plants was only then beginning to be looked at. And we didn't know that. We weren't, and we knew about ayahuasca, but we didn't realize, and nobody did at the time, how important those admixture plants were. So we went looking for this exotic thing called ukuhe, made from Varola, which is the trees, they're a genus of trees in the nutmeg family that are used to make snuffs. A lot of the Amazonian tribe make snuffs out of it. And that's DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT in combination usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So when you guys decided to go to South America and search this out, what was the drive? There was one person in the States that had mentioned it and said, it was quite mysterious back then. So it must have taken a lot of balls for you guys to be like, hey, we're going to head to the jungle. We're going to see if we can find this crazy head job here that we can discover. So where did that all come from?
Well, like I said, when we stumbled on DMT, it wasn't only the most interesting drug, it was simply the most interesting thing that we'd ever encountered.
Sure.
And we thought, well, this is a real mystery. And this is really, really a secret and really, really worth looking into. I mean, it's so worth looking into.
Very profound. So
yeah, nothing else that we'd encountered. I mean, it was like, we got to go after this thing. And the motivation was partly that DMT, when you smoke it, as you probably know if you've smoked it, it's very, very short acting. And it only lasts about 10 or 15 minutes. And it produces this overwhelming psychedelic experience that you come back from. And, it's hard to bring stuff out of that state that's really useful other than a sense of astonishment. And it was like, oh my God, this is it.
You can't really describe it from whatever.
Yeah, you can't really describe it. And so on the nuts and bolts level, what we wanted was a form of DMT that would last longer. And we thought maybe if it would, the orally active form would last longer, and then we could kind of get our oriented in that place and learn more about what was going on. That was the really simple rationale for going after this orally active form of DMT. And of course, when we finally got to La Chirera, what we encountered were the mushrooms, which in fact are the perfect orally active form of DMT. But we didn't realize that at the time. And
it was right under your noses, basically, right?
It was right under our noses, and we didn't take them seriously. We looked at them, these will be fun to play with until we wait for the real secret to show itself, or until we find this ukuhe that we were looking for. Well, as it turns out, mushrooms are the real secret. And, we took them much too lightly, and we had, but that didn't last very long. I mean, it took, it was very soon we got, we got to a place where they were running the show more or less.
Right. Yeah.
We were just sucked into it, but we didn't know what the hell we were doing.
You're definitely a trailblazer, Dennis.
Yeah, we had no idea, believe me. I mean, I look back on it and we're lucky we got out of there alive. We're lucky we got out of there more or less sane, but we did. Somebody was looking after us, and here we are.
Now, in the book, you mentioned that. I don't want to give too much away about the book. People, you really should read it to get a detailed orientation of what's going on.
Yeah, you really have
there.
to read it because
and then it's a few chapters where you reference La Chirera.
Right.
And I also know that in one of Terrence's book, he described it from his perspective. What was it called? The something landscapes?
The Invisible Landscape. Two, actually. The Invisible Landscape we co-authored.
Okay.
Shortly after we came back from La Chirera, about 3 years after we came back, and that came out in 1975 originally, and that was an attempt to sort of put all this in a scientific context, or at least explain in a way that seemed scientific some of the ideas that we had. And, you know, many of the ideas in the invisible landscape, I'd have to say now, are clearly, you know, bunk. I mean, not to be put too fine a point on it. I mean, a lot of them don't stand up to scrutiny. Most of them don't stand up to scrutiny. But we had some very funny ideas, which were downloaded from these mushroom states. And then Terrence wrote in I think it was published about 1992. He wrote True Hallucinations, which, in my opinion, is the best thing he wrote, because it reads like a novel. I mean, it reads like an adventure story, which is what it was.
Yeah,
so
it really was.
It's the narration of what we went through, you know, what took us there and what the adventures that happened to us. So there's no attempt to really you know, make it technical or anything like that. It just reads like a travelogue, it's a Heart of Darkness story, and you know, with psychedelics at the center of it, in a sense. So you know, if you read, I consider True Hallucinations required reading if you're going to read the Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. They really go together, and it's Terrence's story and it's my story, and they're complementary to each other.
I'll have to pick that one up. I've read Food of the Gods, which I found very entertaining. But I haven't read that one yet. So it'd be interesting to see both of your perspectives. I only have your perspective on it.
Well, yeah, you can read them both. You can read them independently, but you really, if you want the full picture of, you know, the McKenna's madness, if you will, you gotta read both of them. Yeah. So and Terrence's other books, his Food of the Gods and all that, they're interesting books.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
but they're you know, in some ways they are an effort to be more technical. I mean, they're not really talking about this stuff. They're, you know, I mean, they're good. They're good for what they are. But I think True Hallucinations is a classic.
While you were down there and you're going through all these experiences, you're basically on a dose of mushrooms all the time. And you mentioned in the book how they grow everywhere, and you hit the right time. The rains were good, and you know, there was a lot of cow patties everywhere, and they're just sprung up out of everywhere. So you guys have like this endless supply of psilocybin. You're eating it constantly, and you start kind of going down to the state. You call it hyperspace at the time. You also call it a disengaged from conscious reality, and you're communicating with what you call the teacher, which is basically the essence of the mushroom spirit. Do you think that there was anything to that, looking back on it from hindsight, or do you think this is stuff that you're basically just experiencing as a normal psilocybin trip, or do you think that what I'm asking basically is that prolonged exposure, nonstop, you know, all day, every day? Do you think that puts you in communication with something that most people don't understand?
Well, it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly had that impression at the time, and I think a lot of people who take psilocybin and some of these other things, ayahuasca and other things, they do have a way of presenting to you as though they're almost,
a spirit,
you know, they have a personality, they have a spirit, or they are a spirit. It's not clear what, but they have this way of presenting as though you are in dialogue with something that is not you, you know, that is not the self, and is telling you things. The trick is it a part of your, you know, a reductionist would say, well, it's got to be part of you. It's part of you that's split off, and
your
you
ego,
know,
it's
reflecting back on you in some way, as though it wasn't you. But then if you I mean, so that's the reductionist view. If you talk to a shaman about it, they'll say, well, what did you think? Of course these are spirits. Of course these are intelligences. Why do you have to overanalyze it? Why do you have to put it into a reductionist mold of some kind? I don't think we can answer the question, frankly. I think that's one of the challenges for neuroscience. You know, Terrence used to, when he was post La Trera, in the years post La Trera, when he would take psilocybin by himself in the dark, high doses. That was his not that frequently, but frequently enough, fairly frequently.
I've heard his prescription basically is large doses infrequently.
Large doses infrequently and in the dark. But what do you mean by infrequently? I mean, not every day,
relative, I guess, right?
A week, every few months. But he would get into these I thou dialogues with the mushroom, and he would say, "Tell me something that I cannot possibly know." And if it could tell you something I can't possibly know, then that's proof that it's not you. It's some other intelligence out there that is actually transmitting information. But very hard to nail that down, And the mushroom would even say, "I'm not going to do that, because then you won't need me anymore." I don't know. But I mean, think about it. How can you nail it down to tell you something that you can't possibly know?
Right.
Because how do you know what you know and what you don't know?
You just know. Right?
You just know. Yeah. But don't lead me down the primrose path into getting into this. People have to read the book. I'm not going to let you seduce me into giving you any details about this, because we'll never get done. And I feel like Brad's here, and the guy can't get a word in edgewise. So
I've been just soaking it up, Dennis. This has been great. I've heard a lot about ayahuasca, and it's been such an exploding area where people are looking into, and people are traveling en masse right now down to South America, and some of them are finding a lot of help. And they're finding a lot of healing, and some of them are dying because they're not being supervised, or they're not getting the kind of care they need.
Right.
So,
well,
and everything in between.
Everything in between. I mean, actual deaths from taking ayahuasca. It does happen. It has happened. It's put a
sensationalized
over
the
whole phenomenon. It's not from ayahuasca. It's from not being taken care of. I mean, they, and it is rare, but you're right. Some people are going down there, and they're having marvelous experiences, and they're coming back better people. And I would say, that's probably the majority of people. But now it's become so commercialized, and you take your chances. You go to a place like Iquitos, and if you don't kind of know the ropes, or you don't know somebody there, or you don't have, if you're just a tourist showing up at the airport, you'll be asked probably several times before you even get to your hotel if you want to take ayahuasca. And if you don't know the territory, if you don't know a little bit about what's going on, if you just say, well, sure, this guy seems like, the taxi driver seems like a nice guy, and so he'll take you to, his brother-in-law's, and, and it could be great, but it could be not so great. Yeah. So this is actually one of the things that one of the organizations I'd like to plug here a little bit is the Ethno-Botanical Stewardship Council. You know about that, Brad?
Yeah, I was going to mention them too. They're doing great work.
They're doing wonderful work. They're trying to address issues of sustainability for these medicines and develop sustainable infrastructures for producing them, but also develop more or less voluntary frameworks for these retreat centers that are operating in South America to join and commit to a certain standard of operation and so on. And that's sorely needed, and that's what's happening. We don't need the government to step in and either prohibit this or try to regulate it. These organizations can regulate themselves, and that's what's happening, with a modicum of goodwill And everybody wants to see this, to see these retreat centers, develop into a good thing and be there to provide people with these types of experiences, because I don't think it's going to happen in the States. Ayahuasca is one of the ones that's not going to be usable in the States for a long time, because you may disagree, Brad, I'm not sure, but it's a longer track, because it's a plant, mostly because there's no authorized grower or producer of ayahuasca. So it's the same conundrum that faces cannabis, right? You can't do cannabis research unless you use NIDA's cannabis, which is
a bunch of horse
garbage.
Yeah. Cannabis is definitely a significant issue there.
We're still having the same problems, Brad. Last time we talked, you said it was impossible to get a hold of it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, are we? Yeah.
You wouldn't feed that cannabis to your dog, right?
Right.
It's horrible stuff.
Since our last discussion, Brad, we talked about marijuana. 2 states have legalized since our last discussion.
Yeah.
Recreational use, Washington and Colorado. So even though those states are completely legitimate for recreational use, you still need to get your source from a federal mandate. Is that right?
That's right.
That's
because
ridiculous.
Our goal is to make it possible for physicians to prescribe marijuana. That's our immediate short-term goal. Ultimately, we want to see marijuana available safely and legally for everybody.
Right.
But the path that we're following, this prescription path, in order for the FDA to evaluate.
Sure, you have to go
research,
through there first.
It has to be federally approved research, and the only way to get it still is through the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which, as you might imagine, doesn't like to sell marijuana.
Yeah, I get that.
And certainly doesn't like to sell good marijuana.
Right.
I guess they figure as long as they use garbage.
Yeah. Supposedly they have the strains that we need. We're trying to explore a variety of strains, looking at different ratios of THC and CBD. Previously, there were some complaints from researchers that it was full of sticks and stems and totally unusable for researchers. Now, the producer at the University of Mississippi says that they have the strains that we would need. However, the Public Health Service has been sitting on our resubmitted protocol for 3.5 months with no time limit and no indication of when they might respond. And in the meantime, veterans are committing suicide every day, and this research is on hold, and we're still having the same conversation.
What can people do who are listening to kind of counteract that? Is there any petitions or anything you guys have where it's like
we're starting to put some stuff together? With this 3.5 month delay here, we've sent emails to the Health and Human Services Department saying basically, hey, we really don't envy you guys because your job is to obstruct medical marijuana research. Right. We're starting to put together possibly some rallies in the future against or asking Health and Human Services to process this protocol and let the study go forward, and hoping to get some congressional support down the line also, because what we really need at this point is for Health and Human Services to abolish this review process entirely. Correct. Marijuana is right now the only Schedule I drug. It is the only drug that you have to go through NIDA in order to do research. If you want to do research on LSD or MDMA or ayahuasca or DMT or aspirin or Prozac, you go and get a DEA license and you manufacture it yourself. With marijuana, you can't go to the DEA because they won't grant us the license. We tried that. We lost in a federal court of appeals. And so we have to go.
I would say ayahuasca is an exception, though. I don't think you can add that to the list because it's not even as far along as cannabis. At least with cannabis, there's an official government source, right? With ayahuasca, there is no official government ayahuasca grower. And so if you want to do a study in the States where you have to have an IND and you have to have a very well characterized, standardized medicine, whether it's a liquid or a freeze-dried preparation or whatever, but you want it to be well characterized, you can't do that because you can't just import ayahuasca from South America and use it, your quality control goes out the window if you do that. And so effectively they block ayahuasca research through the usual IND type approach.
That's really interesting. We've done observational research.
You can do observational
in Canada.
Right.
Where that's already happening in the context of a First Nations band.
And ayahuasca is legal there, correct?
No.
No, it's not. Not in Canada.
Well, Brad, you probably have a better idea there.
I think it's legal for religious use for certain groups. I think the First Nations, the Native groups in Canada. Also, there's a couple of groups here in the U.S. that have also been approved or have gotten some sort of court approval. The
Santo Daime and the UDV, it's legal here. In Canada, the Santo Daime has what's called a Section 56 exemption, which is a general exemption that Health Canada can give a drug that's normally prohibited. And they grant these Section 56 exemptions all the time for like an experimental drug, but somebody wants to use it for an illness for which there's no other drug. But in this case, they've granted a Section 56 exemption to the Santo Daime, to a chapter of the Santo Daime in Montreal, as I understand it. And for First Nations, as they call them up there, I don't know if it's just a blanket, they don't care, or if it's legal for them. I'm not sure. But technically it's not legal for anyone else, even in Canada. So what I'm saying, what I'm advocating lately is, let's just step out of that whole FDA framework and go to Peru and do the work in Peru. I mean, that's where it's from. And, unlike the United States, the Peruvian government has declared that ayahuasca is a national patrimony. So they are quite open to see research done with it. And I think they would like to see some good clinical studies done, because that, they like the ayahuasca tourism phenomenon. It brings people to the country and they spend money. They don't like the bad publicity that comes with the occasional problems that show up. So if you could say, well, we're actually, working with Peruvian medical institutions, physicians, and so on, to develop clinics for therapy, then that's a whole sort of medical tourism aspect that could emerge. And I think that would be a good thing. That would be good for Peru, and people would have the option to go down there. I just heard people write me all the time and say, my son has PTSD, or they have some intractable problem with alcoholism and so on. Where can I get ayahuasca therapy? And I have to write back and say, well, there are places in the States where this is being used and you could go there, but I can't tell you what they are, because I would be committing a crime to tell you where they are. And I say, go to Peru if possible and do this down in Peru. And some have. And I just got an email today from a woman who took her son down to a place in Iquitos. I recommended it to her. I know it's a reputable place. And she said, basically, it's changed his life. Sure. He's coming back. He's over his PTSD, and he's now moving forward to figure out, where he's going to go with his life. So the stuff works. There's no doubt.
I wanted to ask you both this question. If you could take the hats off for MAPS and Heffter for a second. You do hear about, you mentioned these places in the United States that have the ayahuasca available. I actually went to a place myself after one of my listeners reached out and told me about it in the Detroit area. Mm-hmm. And it was, I called him a shaman at first after I sat down with him, as he calls himself a facilitator. But basically what he has is somebody, and I talked to him before the ceremony and everything about how it's all working, and I was much more knowledgeable on it, I think, than he was prepared for. He has a question I'd like to get to near the end. But basically, how do you guys feel about people shipping up ayahuasca in a liquid form? Obviously, there's Dennis, you have the botanist background. You know that it takes a tremendous amount of plant material to get the ayahuasca liquid. How do you feel about people, shipping it up and doing it in little ceremonies in their homes and safe places, even though it's quote unquote illegal?
Well, I think the issue here again is sustainability and overuse of it. I mean, ideally, ayahuasca, what these centers are doing is great. I mean, these are intentional communities. They're providing usually a service to the local people. These are spiritual communities, essentially.
Right, absolutely.
They should be allowed to just grow their own ayahuasca in greenhouses or whatever, and then that problem goes away. But they have no choice right now. They can either get it from Hawaii. There's a lot of being grown in Hawaii, but again, you have to know the sources, and that's technically an illegal source. I don't know if they're willing to take the risk. I guess more power to them, but it's, they do and some do. It's a pity that it has to even be a risk. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah, I think I totally agree that sustainability is the main issue there. As we get more interest, we have 7 billion people on this planet. In these traditional spiritual communities, there isn't that much use. So there's a huge chance that some of these indigenous rainforests can just be cut down. Just for the use of these. We already see huge swaths of Amazonian rainforest being cut down to harvest saffron, which is used to manufacture illicit MDMA.
Mm-hmm.
And without accountability, without laws, without organizations like the Ethno-Botanical Stewardship Council and others that are encouraging these sustainable practices, there's a huge risk that these rainforests are just going to come under additional attack from illicit harvesters.
Right. There's all kinds of pressure on the rainforest, but the fact is, ayahuasca, the two components of ayahuasca, the vine and the chacruna, which are the main ones, they can all be sustainably cultivated without cutting down any trees. They can be cultivated in the forest. The vines will grow in the trees. What's needed there is some is to help the local people learn about biodynamic agriculture and biochar and some of these things, so they're not practicing the sort of slash and burn style of agriculture. But that doesn't apply to ayahuasca. That applies to anything they might want to grow. I mean, if you look at their food crops and so on, if you look at the Amazon, from the archaeological perspective, we think of the Amazon as this trackless wilderness that, there was only, if you look back, what they now understand was that, 5,000, 10,000 years ago, there were millions of people living in the Amazon. It was a highly populated place and a completely sustainably managed ecosystem. But, there's not monumental ruins. There's not that kind of thing. But if you look at these things by satellites and so on, you realize that there were orchards, there were, aquaculture installations. There were all these kinds of things that were there. This was a highly managed ecosystem. There's no reason why, and all that's been forgotten. I mean, they're not, even the people that live there and depend on growing their own food, they've forgotten these techniques, but they could be rediscovered and re-implemented. There's no reason why not. So hopefully that'll come about, and maybe the ayahuasca will lead the charge, because there's now this interest. And the same thing that applies to ayahuasca can apply to any other food crop that they might grow or anything they might grow.
Yeah, Dennis, I think there's this way that these drugs are drawing our attention to parts of ourselves or parts of our ecosystems in just that way. You know, we think about MT, it draws our attention to our endogenous DMT system. LSD played a role in the discovery of the serotonin system. Marijuana and the discovery of the endocannabinoid system. We could see how if there's enough attention and intention in the cultivation of a sustainable ayahuasca community, we could also maybe hopefully see more attention to the places it comes from.
Yeah, well, that's happening. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how often people who take ayahuasca, I mean, it happens with other substances as well, but ayahuasca, people come back with this kind of renewed eco-consciousness, if you will, you know, and a sensitivity to, you know, how fragile the planet is and how much we're impacting it, and you know, a sincere desire to do something about that. So yeah, that's part of, I mean, you know, you can say, well, I don't know what you could say. It's just it's an effect that seems associated with ayahuasca. You could say, well, you know, I mean, like I've said before, you know, we monkeys only think we're running the thing, the show, and maybe ayahuasca is trying to send us a message, you know, and say, wake up. You know, we have to stop despoiling the planet before it's too late.
It's an interesting conundrum because there has been a real explosion with ayahuasca knowledge. I mean, I hadn't even heard about it until a couple years ago when I started listening to different podcasts, and it came up, and more I'm kind of you know, I see where it's happening, and I hear about more and more people doing it, and it's interesting that if it gets too aggressive like that we could almost wipe out the supply. I hadn't even really thought about the sustainability behind it, but I guess that really could be a real problem.
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, it can be a problem, but it's a solvable problem. Like,
is anything being noticed down there as far as the supply being less, or are there people? How does it work down there? Are they noticing a lack of supply, I guess?
I can't really speak to that. I don't know. I think there is some, you know, there is some like it's not so much with the vine, but sometimes chacruna is in short supply and things like that. Chacruna takes a lot longer to grow, and you know, you can't produce the huge biomasses of it that the vine can produce. A single vine can be 1,500 feet long and weigh several tons, you know, so they get big, these things. Chacrunas are small trees, even when they're mature. But again, I think in these areas, I think that there's a lot of cultivation going on already, whether it's sustainable or not. I mean, they're just responding to the market. You know, but if you think about, well, just look at the UDV and the Santo Daime in Brazil, for example. In those two religions, each one, there's about 7,000 people in each religion, which is very small compared to Catholicism, which has millions of people. Right. But so 20,000 people, say 20,000 people roughly, somebody somewhere has got to produce enough ayahuasca to meet the needs of 20,000 people every 2 weeks.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about it like that.
So if you think about it that
one
way,
little
you
piece
think
of,
about how much of it is being consumed in around Iquitos. I mean, somebody told me, and I have no idea if the figure is accurate, but they would say traditionally in Iquitos, Saturday night is the night to take ayahuasca. So and Iquitos has about 400,000 people. And this person who lives in Iquitos says on any given Saturday night, 40% of the people in Iquitos are taking ayahuasca.
That's not even to account for the tourism, right?
And that's not even accounting for the tourism.
That's a lot of drink.
That's a lot of drink, and that's a lot of biomass. And they could have been completely wrong. I mean, I have no way to verify that, but there's a lot of it being consumed for sure. You know,
interesting. Well, Let's change pace here a little bit. Brad, I want to give you an opportunity to discuss the new book that you edited. I believe it was with Rick Doblin, right?
Yeah, that's right.
The book is called Manifesting Minds.
Yeah, Manifesting Minds.
Give us a little bit of background, and what is this book?
Sure. It's as part of MAPS education work, we'd like to translate the results of scientific research into public knowledge, and also in addition to exploring these clinical contexts using psychedelics, also talking about the other beneficial uses too is really important. And one way that we've done that fairly successfully in the past is through special editions of our bulletin. And the MAPS Bulletin is a triannual publication. It comes out 3 times a year. It started as a 1-page newsletter email from the desk of Rick Doblin and just kind of grew to include outside perspectives and people working on new projects and so on. So Manifesting Minds is an anthology of some of the best or most interesting articles from past editions of the special editions of the MAPS Bulletin, and it has some articles looking at our clinical work, so looking at some of the how the brain works and the clinical effects of MDMA and post-traumatic stress disorder, but also a whole lot else. So we have articles in here from Ram Dass talking about the value of psychedelic experiences for rites of passage, so for helping young people or other people sort of become initiated into cultural rites. So bringing this kind of shamanic spirituality into a more Western context. And we also have articles in there. We have an interview with Ann and Sasha Shulgin. Sasha Shulgin, who first started promoting and discussing the therapeutic uses of MDMA and has been responsible for probably creating more new psychedelic compounds than anybody else in history. So we have a lot of different articles and different chapters and approaches in that book that kind of take a look at psychedelic experiences from a broader perspective, and spirituality and sexuality, also in ecology. We have a couple of articles in there looking specifically actually at the value of ayahuasca experiences for producing some of these ecological planetary perspectives. So we hope with this book that it kind of gives people a way into talking in a legitimate, open way about psychedelics that isn't just clinical and isn't just limited to the scientific, but also kind of resonates with their own experience.
Well, you had actually, MAPS had a special issue on psychedelics and ecology, which I thought was a great issue. I mean, some very interesting first-person accounts in that issue. It was really good. I don't recall exactly when it came out. It was a few years ago, but it was excellent.
Yeah, it was
as they usually are. Most of the MAPS bulletins are really good, really informative and good, I think.
Well, I believe you've been a contributor, haven't you, Dennis?
Probably, occasionally. Yeah.
Yeah. We have some articles in there on the Huichol peyote dance. Peyote being another psychedelic that is used in native ceremonies. We also have an article on deep ecology and how psychedelics influenced Arne Naess and his perspective on deep ecology and the close connections between human beings and our planetary environment. So really just lots of different ways into the subject through this book. And it's 25% off right now. We're trying to get the word out. So it's at maps.org.
Do it, people. Get it.
Yeah.
Get it.
Dennis, I wanted to... There's an infamous quote that I've heard you say a number of times, and it's that we are drugs. And that people want to talk about, this drug is bad, and it does this to us and all that. But realistically, our brain is a drug producer.
Exactly.
Is that what you're trying to get across with that?
That's what I'm trying to get across. Well, yeah, we're made of drugs, actually. And I think it goes back originally. I can't claim authorship of that. I think it originally goes back to Salvador Dali.
Okay.
Somebody asked him, how do you come up with all this crazy ideas for your art, and are you on drugs or what? And he said, no, I am drugs. and that's true if you think about it. I mean, I think the thrust of the idea is we're biochemical engines, we're neurochemical engines, and basically experience itself is a drug state. I mean, we are prisoners of our own, whatever
pharmacology, right?
The brain is an organ that creates a model of reality, and that's the reality that we inhabit. Well, how is that different than a hallucination? I mean, it is a hallucination. It's the reality hallucination. And everything that we experience is a neurochemical state of some kind. So, and we're made up of, exactly as you say, these neurotransmitters and hormones and things like that, which run the engine of our bodies and our brains. Those are drugs. Take them outside that context and they're drugs, no doubt about it. So we're made of drugs.
It's interesting. I think about these science fiction ideas. I've heard Kurzweil talk about the singularity and things of that nature, and I wonder if in the future, if we have these supercomputers that are able to maybe upload our consciousness somehow to a mainframe somehow. But see, what I think is lacking in that is exactly what we're talking about, is the drug faction. Because everything, I mean, when we see something and we see you hear about it all the time, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you're overlooking the Grand Canyon, your brain is just dumping just different chemicals inside your body. You get that dopamine release, the serotonin, oxytocin, all these chemicals that make you feel good. So I don't know if eventually that will be possible, but if so, they're going to have to write programs basically to
they're going to have to write design psychedelics for artificial intelligence.
We're getting fucking deep here.
There's
people,
a
so
challenge.
Yeah, we're only a few studies away from that one.
Yeah. But as Brad pointed out, and it's true, the brain is goop.
Yeah.
And it's a spongy mass of tissue that runs on neurotransmitters, and it's all these neurons that are tangled together, and their function is to communicate with each other. I mean, that's what they do. They talk to each other using neurotransmitters and electrical means in some ways, and the net result is you get whatever you get. This the brain is a pattern creating and pattern discerning organ. That's why you can take what seems to be completely disorganized input, and it will impose a pattern on that. And that's a lot of what it does. And I think that's what psychedelics do in some ways. They let you step out of that context and look at the raw material of apprehension. It's like you get to turn the circuit board over temporarily and see how all this is wired. And you say, oh, that's interesting. That's what's going on. And it gives you insight really into neural functions that way, I believe. It's invaluable for studying that. But I mean, I don't know if it's ever going to be possible to upload consciousness, into an artificial system. First of all, we're a long way from that. We don't even know what consciousness is, right? So let's get that sorted out. And then, and I do think, I think that the, all the work that's going on with artificial intelligence and so on is very fascinating. And I've really sort of, if we can build a machine that's truly conscious, then
should we?
Well, whether we should or not, I mean, we will
question,
if we're
we do it all the time. It's called reproduction.
Yeah, exactly. But if we can build one, it's worth doing, because in doing that, we're going to learn an incredible amount about what consciousness is. If we can make a machine that is not human, but that has the attributes of consciousness, and then the trick is, how do you know it's really conscious? Is it just simulating consciousness? This is the whole Turing conundrum, the Turing test in computer science. You know what that is, right? Yeah, it's the idea is, you're in one room, you're interfacing with something in the other room, and you're on a you're on a typewriter or whatever, interfacing with this thing. Can you tell from the answers that it's giving whether there's a person in the other room or a machine? And if you can't tell whether it's a person or a machine that you're interfacing with, then it's past the Turing test. And for that, named after Alan Turing. And so for all practical purposes, it is conscious, because, it's kind of like if it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right?
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point about consciousness and not knowing what it is. Us as a species, I mean, there's a lot of different theories, but you have, that the goop is creating the consciousness, and then you have that the goop is maybe a receiver of the consciousness. So I think that's still up
a whole other conversation.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. But I mean, we don't have time to even get into that. But that is one of the key questions. And if it turns out that the goop is the receiver and not the creator of consciousness, then that completely overturns everything we think we know about neuroscience and reality and everything else.
I have a question for both of you. Brad, I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
What do you think is the appropriate measure with legalization of drugs? Do you advocate all drugs being legal? Or do you think that would do a lot for crime? Or do you take almost a stance where, well, let's try certain things at a time? But what's your personal view on that?
My personal view is that if you give people adequate education and a safe place, they will use drugs in the best way possible. And I think they'll use any technology in the best way possible if you provide education and a safe place to use it. So I think just outright legalization, saying, hey, everybody have as many drugs as you want, that's not a complete thought. I think that's that might be one part of it. But in addition to that, we need education. We need, from the get-go, we need to teach people from the time they are young that, there is more than one way to use a drug.
That's what I'm trying to teach my kids. Yeah.
There are ways to abuse it. There are ways to use it better. Some drugs are inherently more harmful and more risky than others. Some drugs are better used for other things. There's a whole there's a whole range of ways that we can educate people about drugs that is far away from the black and white education that people have been getting. And you provide that to people, and in addition, you provide physical contexts, so places where people can go, community support organizations, and so on, where it's possible to use these drugs as safely as possible. So if you're afraid of people jumping out of windows when they're using LSD, maybe you have a designated place with not as many windows.
No windows, right?
It's on the ground floor, perhaps.
Right. There's things
like that, yeah.
To make these things safer without ever saying that they're 100% safer, that everybody should use them. So I think legalization is part of it. Education is the other side.
Okay.
Yeah,
Dennis,
I think.
How do you feel?
I mean, I totally agree with Brad. I think that education is key. People have to come at these things from an informed place, and then they have to get real drug education. And the big travesty, I mean, drug education is a joke, as it's currently done, because, well, the whole message of drug education is don't do it.
Right.
Yeah,
these things are bad, and just don't do it. Well, people are,
they're going to do it.
That's not going to work. Well, people have an inherent, drive. It's like the same approach to sex education. Abstinence is the only choice. Well, that's fine in an ideal world, but in fact, people are going to have sex. That it's built into us. Well, tweaking these receptors that we have through evolution is built into human behavior. So the thing to do is to teach people give them real information about the risks and benefits of these substances, and teach them how to make good choices, both in the substances that they choose to use and the circumstances in which they choose to use them, right? And if you can do that, then and the idea is to minimize the harm and maximize the benefit. I mean, this is not such a crazy idea.
Yeah.
And that's in other words, drug education has got to teach people how to use drugs, not to do it, but if you choose to use substances, then here's how to do it. It's just like getting a driver's license or something. We don't let people go out and drive without a lesson in how to do it. And that's the solution.
Even though cars can be dangerous.
Even though cars can be dangerous.
Cars are far more dangerous than
sure.
any of
absolutely. And drugs can be dangerous, but stupidity and lack of preparation is far more dangerous. Yeah. And I would say, I would go, I don't know that this is a total solution, but I think part of the solution that could be implemented right away is if the regulatory authorities would make a fundamental distinction between plants and drugs. I think this would go a long way towards solving the problem. And if they would basically say, plants, we don't really care. You can muck around with plants, you can make ayahuasca, you can grow opium in your backyard, you can grow mushrooms, whatever. We don't care about these natural substances, and we're not going to regulate them. And our focus is going to be on concentrated, when you start to extract things out of plants and make concentrated powders that are injectable, then we're going to put pressure on that, and we're going to put pressure more on the synthetics and the purified extracts. Not that they should necessarily be legal, but they are inherently much more prone to abuse than plants. And if they just, if they just say, we're not going to enforce the laws against plants, well, right there, cannabis would go away. And that's 95% of the so-called drug problem anyway. So that would solve it, right there. Okay. And it would be a much more I guess, eco-friendly approach, because who are we to say that, this plant is so horrible that it needs to be eradicated from the face of the earth? I mean, humans don't have the right to say that. They're not the fucking smallpox virus. Right. I'm not even sure we should say that the smallpox virus, that we have the right to say that should be eradicated from the face of the earth. Who gave us that right? We're not the owners and rulers of nature.
Yeah.
And
the religious texts, they'd like to think that we are, but I think the bar view from there.
Look where this has gotten us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark here. I did want to get a couple of listener questions in. Some people had some questions. Brad, I'd like to start with you, if that's cool.
Great.
Couple of them. One's kind of an offset question. I'm pretty sure the answer is no, but I'm going to ask it anyway to you. He was curious if there's been any studies on the psychedelic effects of nutmeg. I mean, there are properties of that, but his MAPS.
To my knowledge, I'm sure that there's been some basic research into plenty of basic research into the pharmacology of nutmeg and its potential negative effects when used in different ways. But I'm not aware of any therapies or any psychedelic-inspired approaches using it.
How about you, Dennis? Are you aware of anything?
Not really. There's not. I mean, nutmeg is one of those drugs that it's used in prisons sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I would
things like that. It's one of those things that you have to be so desperate to get high that you would go with something like nutmeg. I mean, it's. But that said, I mean, some of Shulgin's early work on the phenethylamines, the class of compounds that fascinated him for so long, was based on nutmeg constituents, which do contain a lot of these spices, contain the precursors for these substituted phenylisopropylamines, essentially myristicin, is an essential oil from nutmeg. You can modify it essentially if you add a nitrogen to it in the right place, then you get something that's very much like MDMA. And a lot of Shogun's early compounds have the same substitution patterns on the ring as these essential oils. So in that sense, he looked to the natural world to get ideas for the structures, but then he would modify those and introduce nitrogen into them and turn them into, well, amphetamine derivatives is one way to look at it, but probably, a better term is phenylisopropylamines, because they were amphetamines structurally, but not pharmacologically. They were serotonin acting drugs. So in that respect, nutmeg has given us some ideas for structures, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks for that added information.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, listener.
Always too much. Right? Guy
then,
can't shut up.
The other one for you, Brad, was about the MAPS programs. Can vets get treatments and remain anonymous with the MDMA studies?
They're not anonymous within the studies. If anybody wants to speak publicly, for example, after the study or during the study to the media, they have that option. We have information for subjects about that. But within the study, since it requires a comprehensive medical and psychiatric review of history to screen for, people who couldn't participate in the research, then I think anonymity would probably be a barrier to that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the last question I had, I've been hanging on to this one for a while. When I met with my facilitator, we were talking about earlier with ayahuasca. He brought up he sent me this thing called an ayahuasca manifesto. I mentioned that I was going to be speaking with you, Dennis. And from then, I guess he thought it was anonymous at the time, but he researched a little bit more and found out who it was from. But do you think that if ayahuasca was to be synthesized and presented as an orally ingestible capsule or something like that, not freeze-dried as you were talking about earlier, but something altogether different, similar to how psilocybin was synthesized? Because he sent me this thing where...
right. What we call pharmahuasca. It already exists.
Pharmahuasca, okay.
Pharmahuasca, yeah.
There's a word for that now.
Yeah. It's basically DMT plus synthetic DMT plus synthetic beta-carbolines in more or less the same ratios that you find in ayahuasca.
So you get the same effect?
My own experience is limited with it, but you certainly get an effect, which is really quite nice. It doesn't make you sick, for one thing. It doesn't make you throw up. Yeah.
You avoid the purge.
But it's not ayahuasca. No, you don't purge. As a rule on pharmahuasca, you don't purge. It can be very, very, very good.
Okay. He sent me this thing with Maria Sabina, who was very experienced with mushrooms. I guess she was brought down some synthesized psilocybin from Hoffman or something like that, and she was quoted saying it's of the same God, so it's the same type of effect. And Brad, I've heard Rick talk about it a lot, where the difference between natural chemicals and synthesized chemicals, he doesn't really give a distinction, if I'm right, that one is better to the other, one supersedes the other. How do you feel about that?
No, I would agree with that, that there's no inherent better when it comes to chemicals or compounds, but rather what we need to look at is whether they work for what we want them to work for and whether they're safe enough for people. I think in general, plant compounds are going to be safer and more amenable to the human body than other things, just because they've had hundreds of millions of years to develop. Tend to be more balanced and tend to have additional alkaloids, additional compounds in them that moderate or extend the effects in different ways. Whereas synthetic compounds, any chemist can simply assemble a synthetic compound out of atoms, and it could be highly toxic, or it could be highly beneficial depending on its structure and how it's used. So I think in general, plants are going to be safer, and that's kind of what we see. But I don't think you can make any blanket statements about one being better than the other.
Dennis,
No, I
correct?
think they both have their place. Definitely. I think what Maria Sabina said, if I recall correctly, she said the spirit of the mushroom is in the pill.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the exact, and so for her, that was a validation of Albert Hoffman's work. And what I like to remind people of is that the distinction between synthetic and natural is really kind of arbitrary. Synthetic psilocybin has essentially the same effect as psilocybin in the mushroom, but it's a purer form. It's the single, active ingredient. But all of these synthetic drugs have been made by all natural organic chemists. Let's not forget, they're artifacts of the human ingenuity and human imagination. So I don't think they're really. I don't see one as inherently more valuable or more valid than the other. They both have their place. And why not? I mean, we can make use of these synthetics, so there is a place for them, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're not inherently inferior, is what I'm trying to say, or superior for that matter.
Fair enough. Well, thank you guys. Why don't you guys tell us where we can find you, the research programs and the organizations, any new projects you guys might have coming out? Brad, I'll give you first crack at that.
Sure. Well, we're always available online at maps.org, maps.org. We also have a new educational site up just about our MDMA and PTSD research program, and that's mdmaptsd.org. Again, we talked about the conference, Psychedelic Science 2013 conference, a little bit earlier. Again, that URL is psychedelicscience2013.org or psychedelicscience.org, where we have all of those videos. And you can reach me at brad@maps.org, or you can shoot us a general email at askmaps@maps.org. We try to respond as much as possible to questions from everybody. So.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah. Brad and Maps has a whole staff that can help him answer emails. But I'm not hard to find. I mean, I guess the main affiliation is with the Heffter, and so it's heffter.org, HEFFTER.org, and we have a website there that describes our research, all our board members, and so on. That's probably the first place, and people can write to me through Heffter. And then the other thing is I'm a teacher. I teach at the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota, which is the alternative and complementary medicine program there. It's not a new age cult. It just sounds like one. But they tolerate me. They're a little nervous about me, but I keep my classes full, and so they let me get away with teaching about psychedelics, which I do a lot of. So that's another way to reach me, the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota. You can find my email there, and I try to answer all my emails, and so that's another place. And if people want to take courses, they can go there. I'm teaching a course actually in May in Brazil with Luis Eduardo Luna, who is a world's authority on ayahuasca, on the ethnography of ayahuasca, and it's called Plants in Human Affairs. So if you go to the center website, you can find that, and you can sign up and take that course. It's going to be this is the first time we've done it out of the country, so it will be interesting, I think.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I really appreciate you being both on. I appreciate the work you're doing out there in the world. I hope listeners got a lot out of it. I know I did again. I want to thank you, too, for both your time once again. So Thanks a lot for being on.
Real pleasure.
Thank you, Jason and Dennis.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Brad.
Yep.
Had a good time.
Excellent. If you guys want to, head over to the website, there'll be a blog post with the podcast notes. I'm gonna have links in there where you can find MAPS, where you can find Heffter, where you can find Dennis and Brad. Go ahead and reach out, get involved in social media, spread the word a little bit, and if you want to find out more about the IGC, you can go to intellectualgentlemansclub.com. Like I said, we have support tab on there where you can check us all out. I have recommended readings on there. Dennis's book is on there. Please reach out, get a hold of those books, Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss and Manifesting Minds. I encourage you guys to get out there and read. For our exit music tonight, I had a listener send me some instrumental hip-hop. So here is Decap and Brady Watt. The track is called Starbucks. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, IGC Cast. And until next time, guys, hang loose out there.
Okay. All right. A pleasure.
Seriously? You're still listening? Well, why don't you download all the podcasts? www.intellectualgentlemansclub.com. iTunes, Stitcher, the whole works. Go get the rest of them. Later.
I never said I was a gentleman, motherfuckers.